The first time I saw it, I didn't understand what it meant. She was sitting at the kitchen table, going through her things as she always did in the mornings. I was supposed to be getting ready for school, but something about the way she was acting caught my attention. The bag she carried, a large, sleek black handbag, was open, and she was rifling through its contents with an intensity I hadn't seen before. She never made it a habit to show what was inside that bag. It was her world, her space, and I had learned over the years to respect that boundary. But that morning, something was different. I noticed that her hands were trembling slightly as she pulled out a small, worn photograph, something old, something she had clearly held onto for a long time. She stared at it for a long time, her face softening in a way I had never seen before. The photograph was of my father, the way he had looked before he'd become a shadow of the man he used to be. He was younger, full of life, his arm around her, smiling in a way that felt foreign to me. It was a memory. It was her memory of him before everything changed. Before he started to slip away into someone else, someone I didn't recognize. She didn't know I was watching her. I kept my distance, standing by the kitchen door, unsure whether to say something or retreat into the quiet, where I didn't have to face what I was seeing. But something about the look in her eyes, the vulnerability that flickered there, made me pause. This wasn't the cold woman I had come to know, the one who never seemed to feel anything. This was someone different, someone who carried a burden she hadn't shared with anyone. She slipped the photo back into the bag, her hands still trembling. And I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I noticed it again. Every time I saw her, the bag was there. She would open it for a moment, her fingers brushing against the photograph like it was a secret she wasn't ready to let go of. Each time she did it, she seemed a little less composed, a little more fragile. I couldn't understand it. Why did she keep this picture? What was so important about it that it lived in the depths of her handbag, hidden away from everyone, including my father? I had always seen her as someone who didn't care. Someone who had walked into my life and taken things from me without ever truly acknowledging the damage she caused. But now, as I watched her carefully, I started to see a different side to her. It wasn't the person who had tried to replace my mother. It wasn't the woman who had made me feel like an outsider in my own home. It was the woman who had loved my father before all of this. The woman who had carried his memory with her, locked away, never letting it out. I had spent so long angry at her, angry at how she had come in and taken over. How she had forced herself into a family that didn't want her. But I didn't know her story. I didn't know how much she had lost. How much she had been trying to hold onto in the face of my father's decline. I didn't realize until then that she was just as trapped by his memory as I was. One evening, after dinner, I saw her sitting by the window again, the bag resting beside her on the couch. I watched her for a while, the same photograph tucked away inside, waiting to be pulled out again. I wanted to ask her about it. I wanted to understand. But I didn't know how. I had spent so many years resenting her, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. I didn't know how to bridge that gap. But then, she looked up, catching my eye for the first time in what felt like ages. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She didn't look away, and I felt something shift in that quiet moment, a kind of understanding. Maybe even a recognition that we were both caught in the same situation. "You've been watching me," she said softly, not with accusation, but with a strange gentleness I hadn't expected. I started, but my words faltered. Why do you keep it? The picture? She hesitated, the corners of her mouth twitching as if she were unsure of how to answer. Finally, she reached into the bag and pulled out the photograph. Her fingers traced the edges, the familiar smile in the image reflecting back at her. I keep it because he's still a part of me, she said quietly. Her voice shaky for the first time I'd ever heard it. He always will be. No matter what's happened, no matter how much time has passed. That version of him is still here. She held the photo out to me, and for a moment, I just stared at it. It was a different side of her, a side I hadn't seen before. One that wasn't about control or power. It was about loss, about holding on to something that had slipped through her fingers just like it had slipped through mine. I took the photograph from her, not knowing exactly why, but somehow understanding that this was part of her, something she hadn't let anyone else see. It was a memory of the man who had been there before all the pain. Before everything had fallen apart. I don't know if I can ever be the person I used to be, she whispered. Her eyes focused on the photo in my hands. But I'll always carry him with me, in whatever way I can. Even if it's just this. In that moment, I understood. I understood the loss that both of us were carrying. How we were both holding on to pieces of him, each of us in our own way. And as I looked at the photograph, I realized that we weren't so different after all. We were both just trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I didn't say anything more. I handed the photograph back to her. And she placed it gently back into her handbag. For the first time, there was no anger, no resentment. There was just understanding. And maybe, for the first time, there was room for both of us to exist in this house. In the memory of him, without trying to erase each other. We didn't have to be enemies. We were just two people, lost in the same memory, trying to figure out how to move forward. And for once, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I didn't mean to notice it at first, but there it was again. My stepmother's handbag, sitting on the kitchen counter, slightly open. The contents scattered carelessly. It wasn't unusual for her to leave things out in a rush. But it was the contents of that bag that had caught my attention. As I walked past, I glimpsed something familiar, the corner of a photograph sticking out. I paused, my curiosity suddenly piqued. I'd seen this photograph before, tucked away in a drawer where she thought no one would look. It was an old photo of my father and her, young, carefree. Before the years had worn down their relationship. Before everything had fractured beyond repair. She didn't know I had seen the photograph before. But that was the thing about her, there were so many things about her life that she tried to hide, to keep locked away in a box no one was allowed to touch. And yet, this photograph kept reappearing, always tucked away. Always hiding just under the surface of her carefully maintained composure. I leaned closer to the bag, trying not to make a sound. I knew it was wrong to invade her space like this, but I couldn't stop myself. She carried that photograph with her, hidden away in her bag. As though it were the one piece of her life that still mattered. The one thing she couldn't let go of. I picked up the photo carefully, holding it gently in my hands. It was a younger version of my father, the one I had only seen in fleeting memories. In old stories. His smile was wide, genuine, and in his arms, a much younger version of her. Happy, unguarded, free of the layers of control she wore now. The picture was worn at the edges, and the faintest hint of a tear ran through the corner. But it was clear, this was a moment from their past that she had kept close. I sat down on the kitchen chair, still holding the photo, unsure of what to do. I had spent years resenting her, hating her for taking over the life I had once known with my father. But as I stared at the picture, I began to see something else, a woman who had loved him, had been loved by him, before everything turned cold. She wasn't the person I had made her out to be in my mind. Not the intruder who had stolen my father's attention. She was someone who had once been a part of his world, just as I had been. I didn't know how much time passed before she came into the room. I hadn't heard her approach, and by the time I looked up, she was standing in front of me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking down at the photograph in my hands. "You've found it," she said quietly, her voice softer than I expected. There was no anger, no accusation, just a simple statement of fact. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to ask her about it, about the memory it held, about why she kept it with her. But instead, I just held the photo out toward her. "Why do you carry it with you?" I asked, my voice not quite steady, my curiosity finally getting the better of me. She reached out slowly and took the photograph from my hands, her fingers brushing mine. "Because I never want to forget," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at the picture, her eyes softening. Before all the distance, before the silence, before he stopped seeing me, stopped seeing us, this is who we were. I watched her as she stood there, her gaze locked on the photograph, lost in some distant memory that I couldn't reach. I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long thinking of her as the one who had broken everything, the one who had taken my place in my father's life, that it was hard to reconcile the woman standing in front of me with the person I had built in my mind. For the first time, I realized that she had lost something too. Maybe it wasn't the same as what I had lost, but it was real. The version of my father she had held onto, this man in the photo, was gone. And maybe, in some way, he had stopped being the man he was in the picture long before he had stopped being the man I remembered. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "If you still carry this, if it means so much to you, then why are you so distant? Why are we always on opposite sides?" Her eyes lifted from the photo to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw something in her gaze that wasn't cold or distant. It was regret. She sighed deeply, a weight of sadness in her expression that softened the lines of her face. "I've carried this with me because it's the only part of him I have left. The only part of him that feels real," she said, her voice heavy with years of unspoken emotions. "But I don't know how to find my way back to him, or to the person I was before everything fell apart. So, I carry it with me. Because it's all I have left of that life, of that version of him." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her for making everything so difficult, for stepping into my life and changing it all. But another part of me, the part that had just seen a glimpse of the woman behind the control, the woman who had once loved my father and wanted nothing more than to hold onto a piece of him, softened. She wasn't just a villain. She was a person who had been hurt too. Someone who had lost something and didn't know how to move forward. For a moment, there was nothing more to say. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was quiet understanding. The kind of silence that comes from shared recognition. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we would ever be able to talk about this again. But in that moment, as we both stood in the kitchen with the photograph of my father between us, I realized that maybe I didn't have to hate her after all. Maybe we were both just lost in the same memory, struggling to find our way. I finally took a step back, my voice gentler now. Maybe Maybe we're both holding on to things that don't belong to us anymore. She didn't respond, but the way she looked at me seemed different, like we had both just crossed a line that we couldn't go back from. Whether that was good or bad, I didn't know. But I knew one thing: she was no longer just a stranger in my life. She was something else now, a person who had her own story, her own losses. And maybe that was the first step toward understanding. It started with a quiet glance, a fleeting moment that I almost missed. My stepmother's handbag was sitting open on the chair, a small, familiar edge of a photograph peeking out. I had seen that picture before, or at least a version of it, in the drawer of the desk where she kept her personal things. But this time, it was different. This time, it was out in the open. I couldn't stop myself. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the edge of the photograph. Hesitant but drawn in. The photo had faded with time, edges soft and frayed, but I recognized the faces. My father, younger, vibrant, standing next to her, smiling that wide grin that had once been reserved only for me. Before everything started to change. She had been holding on to it all this time, hiding it in the very bag that she carried everywhere. I wondered if she even knew she still had it. Or maybe she did. Maybe she had always known. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I quickly put the photo back, tucking it out of sight. She appeared in the doorway, looking at me with that usual calculating gaze, as if trying to assess whether I had seen anything. But she didn't ask. She just stood there, her eyes briefly flicking to the bag, then back to me. "What's on your mind?" Her voice was casual, but there was an underlying tension, a quiet strain that hadn't been there before. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to ask her about the photograph. Ask her why she kept it, why it was hidden away in the bag she carried everywhere. But I didn't. Instead, I shrugged and said nothing, watching her closely. She hesitated before sitting down across from me, her hands folding in her lap. The silence between us grew thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we were both waiting for something, maybe for the right words to come. Maybe just for the right moment to break the tension. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now, as if the question had been hanging in the air between us for too long. "Did you ever wonder what it was like, before everything changed?" She asked, her eyes distant, not meeting mine but looking somewhere just past my shoulder. "Before he became someone else. Before this life we have now." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long resenting her, blaming her for the way things had fallen apart. I had spent years feeling like the space she had taken in our home was meant for me, and that it was her fault that my father had drifted away, that the man I once knew had become a stranger. But now, sitting here across from her, I realized that she was lost in her own way. She had her own version of grief, her own loss that she carried with her every day. She wasn't just the woman who had replaced my mother. She was someone who had tried to love the same man. Someone who had once been in the same place as me, before everything fell apart. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice softer than I had intended. "I guess I didn't know that there was a time before everything changed. I've just been angry." She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving her hands. "I've been angry too. But not at you. Not at him." Her voice faltered, and she looked up at me, her eyes tired, as if they had seen more than she wanted to admit. "At myself. For not knowing how to stop the drift. For not knowing how to keep it all from falling apart." For a moment, there was no sound but the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the corner. I could feel the weight of her words, her vulnerability. And it was like a wall had come down between us. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't the villain I had painted her to be. She was just a person, trying to survive in a world that had become unrecognizable. I didn't want to take his place, she continued, her voice quieter now. I never wanted to. I didn't know how to make things better. I thought if I did everything right, if I was perfect, maybe he'd come back to me. To us. But it didn't work. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her for who she really was, someone who had once loved him. Once hoped for something that had slipped through her fingers. She wasn't a threat to me. She wasn't an enemy. She was someone who had been hurt too. I didn't realize, I said slowly, trying to piece the words together. I thought you were just trying to take his attention. I didn't realize you were just trying to hold on to him. To hold on to what you both used to be. She nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips. I didn't know how to tell you that. I didn't know how to make you understand that I wasn't the enemy. I wasn't the one who changed him. But somehow, I've become the one you blame. The weight of her words settled in me. I had spent so long holding on to anger, to a version of things that wasn't true. I had seen her as the cause of everything that had gone wrong, when really, she had been as lost as I had. We sat in silence for a while longer, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something that felt like the beginning of understanding. The beginning of something I wasn't sure how to define. I'm sorry, I said softly, the words feeling unfamiliar on my tongue. For making you the villain in my story. She looked up at me then, her eyes meeting mine, and for the first time, there was no distance between us. No wall. She simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming on her lips. It's okay, she whispered. We've both been carrying too much. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of everything I had been holding on to start to lift. She had been carrying something, too. And maybe, just maybe, we could both stop carrying it alone. As I left the kitchen that night, the photo of my father still in the bag. Hidden away from the world, I didn't feel resentment. I didn't feel like I had to fight for my place anymore. I just felt like I had seen her for the first time, not as a stepmother, not as a villain, but as someone who had loved and lost, just like me. And maybe, together, we could stop pretending that the past was something we could fix. Maybe it was time to start moving forward, together. Without the weight of everything that had come before us. The first time I saw it, I didn't think much of it. My stepmother's handbag was sitting carelessly on the chair, like it always was. She never kept it in any particular spot. But it always seemed to find its way into the living room after dinner or in the hallway when she was on the phone. What caught my eye that evening, though, was the way it sat open just enough for me to see something inside, a worn, crumpled photograph peeking out from the chaos of receipts, old pens, and lipstick tubes. I'd seen that photograph before. It was one I had glimpsed years ago, tucked away in a drawer I had no business opening. My father and her, smiling, happy, the way they had been when they first met. There was a tenderness in that photo, something raw and real, but I'd never seen it like this. It was tucked away now, always hidden from view. Like it was something she couldn't fully let go of. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, my heart pounding unexpectedly. It wasn't the first time I had seen her hiding pieces of the past. Things she wouldn't talk about, things she didn't want anyone to know. But this photograph, this was something else. It was a reminder of a time when things were simple. Before everything had gotten tangled up between her and my father. before their love had become strained and broken. I wasn't sure why, but I reached for the bag. My fingers brushed against the photo, pulling it gently out, and for a second, I could almost feel the weight of the history that it held. As I held it in my hands, I saw them clearly. My father, younger, healthier, more alive, his smile genuine and warm. And there she was, beside him, her face lit up with joy. Not yet hardened by the years and the silence that would eventually define their marriage. I didn't understand why she still kept this picture. Why it had been hidden inside her bag for so long. Was it guilt? Was it some part of her that couldn't let go of what she had once had with him? I couldn't help but wonder, did she still love him in the way the photo suggested? Or had time and regret washed all that away? I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't hear her approach until she was standing right behind me. "Put it down," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, almost gentle. Like I had just broken some silent rule. I quickly placed the photograph back into the bag, my heart racing. She stood there, watching me, her gaze unreadable. There was a long silence between us, thick with things unsaid. I had never been able to talk to her, she was always so guarded, so distant. But right now, in the quiet of the room, I could feel that the distance between us was different. It wasn't the usual coldness I had grown used to. There was something else there, something that made me hesitate before speaking. "I didn't mean to invade your space," I said, the words coming out awkwardly. "But why do you keep it? That photo? Why do you keep him with you like that?" For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes dropped to the bag, then back to me, as if weighing the decision to answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I never knew how to let him go," she said. Her words heavy with the weight of everything that had happened between them. "I thought if I kept this moment, maybe I could remember who we were before everything changed." The words hung in the air between us. It was as if, in that brief confession, she had peeled away part of her mask, the part one had never been able to reach. The part that I had always resented. She wasn't just the woman who had come into my life and torn apart the family I had once known. She was a woman who had loved and lost, just like I had. She had been trying to hold on to something that was slipping away, and in the process, she had become just as lost as I was. "I never wanted to take his place," she continued, her voice faltering slightly. "But I wanted him to look at me the way he looked at me in that photo. I wanted to be the woman he loved. I wanted to be enough." Her words struck me with the force of a revelation. She wasn't just the woman who had taken my mother's place. She wasn't the enemy I had made her out to be. She was just as broken, just as human, as I was. She had tried, in her own way, to hold on to something that was slipping out of her grasp. And in doing so, she had buried herself under the weight of the expectations that had been placed on her. "I don't know if I can ever be enough," she said quietly. "But I can't let go of him, not yet." I didn't know what to say. The anger I had carried for so long, anger at her, anger at my father for allowing this to happen, began to fade. It wasn't gone entirely, but for the first time, I understood. I understood why she carried that photograph in her bag, why she kept it hidden from the world. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about trying to replace anyone. It was about a woman who had lost something, something she couldn't get back. And she didn't know how to move on from it. I left the room without saying another word. She didn't stop me. There was nothing more to be said. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was the kind of silence that comes after understanding. After shared recognition of something unsaid. And as I walked away, I realized that for the first time in years, my stepmother wasn't the enemy. She was just another person, lost in the same memory, trying to find her way through the pieces of a broken past. Maybe, for the first time, we were both waiting for the same thing, to finally let go of what couldn't be fixed and to find a way forward, together, without the weight of everything that had come before us. I had never thought to look in her bag before. I had always respected that boundary, even when it was clear that it wasn't just filled with makeup and receipts like most women's bags. But there it was, lying on the armchair in the living room, slightly open. And something caught my eye, something familiar. It was the corner of a photograph peeking out from between a pile of tissue paper and old receipts. I didn't even know why I reached for it. Maybe it was the way it stood out, half hidden, the way it seemed to call out to me. But when I pulled the photo out, I immediately recognized it. My father and her, young and full of life. Both of them in that smile that now felt like a distant memory. I had seen this photo before, tucked away in a drawer, hidden from view. But now, it was here, in the middle of the chaos in her bag. Tucked away like something precious, something she couldn't let go of. I held the photograph in my hands, unsure of what to do with it. I had spent years resenting her, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong, for the distance that had grown between my father and me. She had come into our lives, taken over, and made everything feel alien. But now, as I stood there, staring at the photo, I couldn't help but wonder, what was it that she was holding on to? What did this photograph mean to her? Her footsteps broke my thoughts. I hadn't heard her approach, but there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me. I didn't know what to say. The photo in my hands suddenly felt like a violation. Like something I shouldn't have seen. But she didn't yell. She didn't even seem angry. She just stood there, watching me, waiting. "That's the photo, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice quiet, almost distant. I nodded, still not sure of what to say. "Why do you keep it?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Why do you keep him with you?" She didn't look away, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, something real. For a moment, I wasn't looking at the woman who had come into my life and replaced the space my mother had left. I wasn't looking at the person I had spent years resenting. I was looking at a woman who was holding on to something precious. Something that had slipped away long ago. "I don't know," she whispered. "I guess I just never knew how to let him go." Her voice was barely audible, as if she were confessing something she hadn't said aloud in years. She reached out, gently taking the photo from my hands. I didn't stop her. I let her hold it, her fingers grazing the edges as if it was the most fragile thing in the world. "I carried this photo with me for a long time," she continued, her voice shaking just slightly. "When we first got married, when we were happy, this was who we were. The two of us, before everything changed." I didn't know what to say to that. The words caught in my throat. I had never thought of her that way, before the distance, before the coldness. She had been someone once, someone who had loved my father and had been loved by him. She had been a part of his world, a world I had once felt like I belonged to. And now I was left here, watching her hold onto a piece of that past as though it was the only thing keeping her tethered to who she had once been. "I keep it because it's the only part of him that's still mine," she said. Her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on the photograph. "Before he became a stranger. Before he became someone who couldn't see me anymore." I hadn't expected her to say that, hadn't expected the vulnerability in her words. She was always so strong, so poised, so distant. I had never imagined that there was pain underneath all of that. Pain that mirrored my own in ways I hadn't understood. Do you ever miss him? I asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for a moment. Then she nodded, just once, a tear slipping down her cheek before she wiped it away quickly. Almost as if embarrassed by the weakness. I miss him every day, she whispered. I miss the way we were before everything fell apart. I miss the man he used to be. The man who could see me, who loved me. And I don't know how to make sense of the person he is now. The person he became after everything changed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel resentment. I didn't feel anger or frustration. I didn't even feel like I had to fight for a place in my father's life. What I felt, what I finally understood, was empathy. She wasn't the person I had made her out to be. She was just another person, caught in the same web of loss, of longing, of change. I'm sorry, I said, before I could stop myself. I've hated you for so long, I didn't realize how much you were hurting. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. You don't need to apologize. I understand. I've spent years hiding behind the person I thought I needed to be, and in the process, I lost everything, including myself. I didn't know what to say to that. But in that moment, we didn't need words. We didn't need explanations or apologies. We just needed to be there, to understand, to see each other for who we were, not as enemies, but as two people who had been hurt, who had been caught in a world that had changed so much. When I left the room, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I didn't feel the walls between us. For the first time, I felt like we were both standing in the same place. Each of us carrying pieces of him, but not needing to fight for them anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward finding a way to move forward. Together.